Great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you everyone for joining the May Apprenticeship. Great to see you all. I'm Annie Tattinen and co-lead of this wonderful group. I love seeing all these amazing minds and hearts come together and talk about the topic we're all passionate about, apprenticeships. Really excited for this afternoon's topic. And what I'm going to do is just to kind of keep us moving along, I'm going to change things up around the intros. Let's all just put your name and your affiliation and anything else you want us to know, maybe where you're calling in from, in the chat. I think a lot of us know each other, but also we're welcoming some new members, so that's really exciting. So I'm going to turn it over to Vinz Koller, and he's going to introduce our wonderful speakers and the topic this afternoon. So thank you so much, Vinz. I just also want to say thank you so much for bringing this topic to the group. Really appreciate it.
Well, this is a pleasure for me because this is a topic that's been near and dear to my heart. And I feel like we have this convergence moment that has to be celebrated, which is the arrival in earnest of youth apprenticeship to California. It's like the gold rush this is not like 1848. This is a new gold rush that's about to arrive. And we just, So I'm just excited that we can talk about this today. There are two things that, are coming together that we want to talk about. One is the fact that there's a California Youth Apprenticeship Committee that's been formed, and that Adele Burnes, who's the Deputy Chief at the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, and all of you know her, because she's presented before, but probably even before when you were with the Bay Area Community College Consortium, right? So you know her in multiple iterations. We are super lucky that she picked this job as her next job because it just, again, as another instance of convergence of interests and of important currents that need to be brought together. And then we also have another member of the, an actual member of the committee, with Michelle Skoor of Bitwise. I'll let them introduce themselves in more detail. I just want to say a couple things about the importance of youth apprenticeship for California. In other countries, we don't talk about youth apprenticeship. It's just apprenticeship because everybody thinks of apprenticeship as being something for young people. It's an educational pathway that is sort of in parallel with the purely academic pathway. In the US, we sort of designate it as that because it is for younger people, and it happens typically starting in high school. But I think for California, the potential for doing something to not just bring something that is available in some industries and increasingly more industries to people in their 20s and 30s, to people starting in their high school, is going to do create a real change in terms of equity in education. Because one of the things that we find in looking and researching our outcomes in career technical education in particular, is that not everybody's served equally, and that obviously some people are being left behind and are not actually having the kind of outcomes and the kind of success rate that we wish for them. And part of the reason for that is that, it turns out a college pathway for all does not fit all. And I'm not going to preach to the choir here. I think we all believe that. What's interesting is, from the perspective of trying to change that, is sort of what is required. What are the forces that have sort of brought us to this point, and what are the forces that are needed in order to change that into a more equitable picture going into the future. I think the state has done some remarkable, pioneer work in the last few months towards that change. And the California Youth Apprenticeship Committee is one instance of it. There are others. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Adele so she can give you the full picture of what the state is up to when it comes to youth apprenticeship. And then I'll pick it up again at the other end. Oh, good.
And we can get this PowerPoint, Adele?
Nope, because I'm showing you raw slides that I'm going to make better. So you all get to do
Okay.
workshopping.
We're the first pancake, huh?
Yeah, exactly. You all are my first pancake. But yeah, some
right.
of these slides will eventually be made public. As many of you know, I often like to use slides. So let's see if I can get this set up. Hopefully, so okay, cool. Yeah, so we are very excited. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Deputy Chief at the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, and really the focus of my work is the policy and strategy as to how we expand apprenticeship across a lot of different areas. And a particular area that I've been doing a bunch of work on over the past 6 months or so, and we'll be doing even more work on in the coming 6 months, is on this area of California Youth Apprenticeship. And so I think I've been in this forum in the past to present various things. I'm sure at some point I presented on this 5-point plan, but this is just to kind of zoom out at our overall strategy here in California about how we're thinking about expanding apprenticeship, which has a lot of different areas, but the one I'm going to zoom in on, obviously, in this conversation is supporting youth apprenticeship, both for in-school and out-of-school youth. So that's really, it's a key component of how we want to be expanding apprenticeship in California. And there's been this report that you're seeing here was put out last July, and since then, and sort of concurrent with the report, were some pretty big investments and changes into youth apprenticeship. So I'll sort of unpack those a bit here. And just to benchmark us, the average age of an apprentice in 2022 in California was 30 years old. Apparently in the US, the average age is 29, so it's relatively on par with the rest of the US. But in places like Australia, it's age 25, Germany, it's 19, the UK, it's 19, Switzerland, it's 17. And so this is just sort of an interesting side-by-side benchmark in terms of other countries, other parts of, zooming out on the US. So we really want to be looking at this metric and hopefully bring it down over time. I think we're already making a little bit of progress, because when I started at DAS in 2021, the average age was 33. So we're going in the right direction, at least. But I think we want to we hope to bring that average age down quite a bit. Okay. So in terms of what are some of the definitions that we have? In the legislation, in the budget bill that passed last year that invested a bunch into youth apprenticeship and really put forth youth apprenticeship as a mandated priority for the Division of Apprenticeship Standards. For the first time in California, we wrote down a definition of what is youth apprenticeship. And so that definition right now is apprenticeship that's for people age 16 to 24. So that's the extent of a definition that we have here in California. Now, sometimes I think a very important vocabulary point that we have also been utilizing, although to be clear, this is not like in labor code or statute or anything. This is just sort of vocabulary, shared vocabulary that we're using to understand what we mean when we're talking about different things, is high school apprenticeship, which is apprenticeship that starts when you're in high school. And I think sometimes people sort of just flip back and forth between youth apprenticeship and high school apprenticeship as being the same. And I think it's important to distinguish that high school apprenticeship is a subset of youth apprenticeship. So that's certainly been an important vocabulary point. So one of the first things that we did to organize in this direction of trying to develop a youth apprenticeship system in California was to convene the California Youth Apprenticeship Committee, CYAC. So this committee has been convened, and I'm very glad to have Michelle here with us today, and they will share more about their experience with the group and their subcommittee that they're leading, or excuse me, working group that they're leading. But the overarching mandate to this committee, or request to this committee, is to develop recommendations for us on the expansion of youth apprenticeship in California, and specifically to propose any further definitions that we might want to consider actually putting into statute around both youth apprenticeship and potentially high school apprenticeship, since that's, like I said, not a defined term yet. To provide guiding principles around a youth apprenticeship grant program, which I'll touch more on in a moment, and also to just offer insights to us as to how we structure the state's work to expand youth apprenticeship. Because obviously it's not just about the Division of Apprenticeship Standards. It also includes, California Department of Education, our community college systems, our youth serving organizations across the state. And so we want to think about how do we structure this work most effectively. I'm seeing a question. My question is, why 16 years old versus 14 years old? That's what is in labor code right now, that an apprentice can be as young as 16 years old. So that is what is written in labor code. And so we in the state of California cannot have an apprentice who's younger than age 16. Potentially that could be something that the committee makes recommendations on policy changes, but how it is right now, you have to be at least 16 years old in order to be an apprentice in California. So the objective is for this committee to provide a report to the Division of Apprenticeship Standards by July 1st, 2024. So we have convened this committee. It convened for the first time in, I think, late January, early February. And I'll just brag a little bit on this committee. It's a totally awesome committee. We convened an incredible group of people. We had, I think, 80 people were either volunteered or were nominated for this committee. And we had to narrow that down to, I think it's the 18 that we have. And I pulled up, here you go. So I'm going to drop in the chat for all of us. This is our website that has the publicly available information so far about youth apprenticeship. And what you'll find when you scroll down and expand the different sections is the list of all of our committee members. So I know Allison she was hoping to join us today, but she broke her arm. So she's not joining us today, but so you can peruse here to see all the different members, but we've got a really fantastic cross-section of folks that represent our education system, our youth serving organizations, unions. We have 2 youth apprentices on the committee, which I think is fantastic. And folks from the workforce system, we have employers who are actually employing youth apprentices in California. So it's a really fantastic group of folks that we have gathered, and many of these folks know apprenticeship really, really deeply, and others know about serving youth populations really deeply and know our education system. So it's been a really interesting set of conversations that we're having there, and looking forward to the recommendations that come out of that. The overarching plan with this, this was sort of our opening proposal when we kicked off in February, was that we wanted to be like learning from other models in other states and other countries, learning from existing youth programs, and of course, learning about the funding that's out there to support apprenticeship generally. And then, of course, we have like these 3 specific areas that we're seeking advisory from this group on in terms of the grant definitions and the structure of the work. And then ultimately, like arriving at the report to be delivered to us. So that's kind of the overarching about the committee, and I'll let Michelle share a bit more in a moment about the working groups, but just to touch really quickly on the grant. So we have been out, the Division of Apprenticeship Standards have been allocated $20 million in the current budget year that we're in towards a youth apprenticeship grant program. And right now it's being proposed for the coming fiscal year to be another 20 million next year and then 25 million in the following year. So total it's $65 million over 3 years that have been allocated towards a youth apprenticeship grant program. That is, despite it being a tight budget year, that allocation is still included in the most recent May revise that was released a week or so ago. So we believe that that investment is going to continue, but as is, DAS essentially has $20 million in the bank to deploy through this youth apprenticeship grant program. And we are embarking in the month of June and July on a public comment period around this grant. So if you're interested, and especially if you are a youth serving organization or know of youth serving organizations that you think would be important to be made aware of this grant, we're taking this period of time to really listen and hear from folks as to how we can most effectively deploy this grant. And so stay tuned for further communications about that. And we would really, really love to hear the input on how we can best structure this grant. So with that, I will hand it over to Michelle to talk about the working groups that are the working groups within that Youth Apprenticeship Committee.
Thanks, Adele. It's so nice to be here. So many familiar faces, and hello to new faces on the call. So happy to talk a little bit about the working groups. I'm bummed that Allison wasn't able to join us, but of the folks in the group, Allison is helping lead the group of folks who are thinking through the in-school youth working group. So their focus is really looking at high school apprenticeships, that ages 16 to 19. I think to someone's comment in the chat, that I think there was discussion around, like, is it 16? Is that something to look at? And these are questions that both groups are looking at what are current outcomes and what are impacts there. And then really their focus around pre-apprentice and youth apprenticeships in high schools. So that's the in-school youth group. And for out-of-school youth, our focus is really on opportunity youth. And I thought it would be helpful to land in what the definition of opportunity youth, many folks may know what that is, but folks, again, between the ages of 16 and 24, who are disconnected from both a school or education system, but also disconnected from the workforce system. And I think that that is important to note. And that committee is really looking at all kind of what is access, what are reconnections, what is on-ramps, what are pathways back into both of those systems. So that's the in-school youth and out-of-school youth working groups. And then does it make sense, Vinz, for me to transition or share anything else? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, you meant beyond for the other work group or for your work group?
And just anything else on those two. And I think I didn't do an introduction, so I guess I'll do that now. I just skipped right past that.
We would like to know more. What is Bitwise all about?
Why me connected here? So I am the Chief Workforce Officer at Bitwise Industries. Workforce in the space that I'm in, actually, we define the umbrella. Bitwise is a transformative tech economy. So we build tech economies in underestimated cities. So we started 10 years ago, actually this next month in Fresno, California, with the idea that there is so much untapped potential in Fresno that we could connect to technology training pathways that lead to high wage, high growth technology jobs. Inside of Bitwise, we also own and operate a technology consulting business where we ship software as a service, just like any other software development company. The unique nature of how Bitwise does that is that our paid apprentice program, those apprentices during their registered apprenticeship are learning right alongside the senior technologists in our technology consulting business. So when they exit registered apprenticeship, they have a portfolio of real world work. We know that they're ready for entry-level employment in the technology industry via a variety of occupations, because we hire entry-level folks into our tech consulting company. And so we validate that those skills or the certifications that they're learning along the way during their registered apprenticeship is preparing them for a career. And we also know, having talked to so many employers, we're now in 10 cities across the United States, 4 in California, and talking to employers that the pieces of the work besides skill sets or technology platform skill acquisition is that one, skills application was deeply important in terms of someone getting hired post their apprenticeship training, and that in working in teams and learning how to communicate and understanding an entire technology ecosystem in that industry was incredibly beneficial for them to then be hired. Oftentimes we're looking at, as you all may know, the chicken and the egg. You get the skill set, but you haven't yet had an opportunity to apply them. And so this and many other apprentice models are really set up so that folks come with both of those things. And the work that we do at Bitwise is both in the public and the private sector. And so for a good example, if you know Madera County, somebody came from our Salesforce apprenticeship program. He's from Madera County, was a student of Madera County Unified School District, and now leads the Salesforce administration practice for Madera Unified School District. So was a recipient of that, and now is helping lead and is an extraordinary contributor because he himself was a consumer and understands what the product and the needs are of folks and students in Madera County that need those services. So that's a little bit about Bitwise and my work with CYAC.
So I'm wondering, Adele, do you want to talk a little bit about the in-school work group, since Allison's not here?
Absolutely. So the in-school working group is being led up by Allison Frenzel, who is with the California Department of Education. And so the in-school group, like it sounds like, is really thinking about that category, zooming in on high school apprenticeships, right? Apprenticeships that start in high school and so really like sort of 16 to 19-year-olds. And I will say that it's a tricky intersection of like, how do we make apprenticeships work in school? And how do we make like the requirements of graduation and the requirements of apprenticeship square with each other? And the early implementations and the folks who have been sort of piloting and pioneering this definitely like have a very sort of apprenticeship light during school, and then the program continues after high school is complete, and like that, you know, the hours requirement ends up getting more accumulated in the time that's sort of post high school. So I think that there's a lot of interesting work to be done to understand like what can we do with apprenticeship to make it fit into our education system, and what should we be doing with pre-apprenticeship? Like I noticed in the chat, you know, follow up to this whole concept of like, why not 14 and 15-year-olds? Well, there's this whole realm of pre-apprenticeship that we could be rolling out and really intentionally sort of structuring our career and technical education programs within our K-12 system to be aligned with apprenticeship, so that when somebody graduates from high school, it can be like a very easy step from high school into an apprenticeship. And I think that the thing that this in-school group is really investigating and discussing is does it make sense and how does it make sense and what do we need to change in order for there truly to be like in-school youth apprenticeship, high school apprenticeships? And do we need to create a different definition of apprenticeship that is high school apprenticeship that has different requirements? Like when we look to places like Wisconsin, they've created an entirely different definition of apprenticeship that's just for high school. It's lower hours on the job. It's a shorter duration. There's a lot of structural things that are different. But then also, are there like educational system requirements that need to be adjusted to allow all of this to happen? So it's a lot of like systems change work. So we're just really embarking upon that work as a group. So no grand conclusions yet, but that's where the conversation. And Vince, I think I'm handing it back to you to talk about CWA.
Great. Yeah. So, and I would also say that part of the design that has to happen regarding the high school based youth apprenticeship is that the idea is that if this were to start in the 11th or 12th grade, and all those questions are really quite open, then the idea is, of course, these students would still have their general education credits to complete. So they're not done. It's not, in that sense, it's different from your typical apprenticeship where you're talking about splitting time between a workplace and related technical instruction, and that's it. In this case, you're really talking about three different things. You're talking about the on-the-job training, some related technical instruction that is tied to that particular job, and then general education that you tend to have to deal with, again, if you're in high school, because we would not want to, or I think that's the general conclusion, you would not want to create a educational pathway that leaves those students behind in terms of their general education. But I want to mention one other aspect of in this lineup of converging initiatives, and that's the Feinstein earmark. So by some happy coincidence, a funding proposal that went to the Senator Feinstein's office to support and really craft a youth apprenticeship strategy for California that was submitted by the California Workforce Association got funded roughly at the same time as the DAS launched the California Youth Apprenticeship Committee. And it turns out there's a lot of parallel components to the work of what the committee is supposed to do and what this grant is supposed to complete through the California Workforce Association. First and foremost, both of them are supposed to create a plan for youth apprenticeship. And the plan elements are somewhat similar in that we are supposed to look at the research, review some of the models elsewhere in the world and elsewhere in the country, and then come up with the recommendations. And we're supposed to do a legislative analysis. It's not a complete coincidence that there's a parallel track between those two, because some of the same people were behind both initiatives. And it so happens that now we have the fortunate convergence where because we're collaborating on these, really a lot of parallel activities can basically converge as well. So California Workforce Association, in partnership with CareerWise and myself as a consultant to the California Workforce Association, are supporting the Youth Apprenticeship Committee in their work, helping with the background research, helping to document what the committee is doing, and also helping to bring some promising practices to the committee, and then eventually the legislative analysis, which has started to some extent, but still is underway. So that's how these two initiatives come together. And one thing that's going to happen, we've already had some presentations to the committee in the very first meeting. Another interesting one that I would recommend that you tune in if you're interested is happening on June 5th, actually two of them, one by the state of Washington, where they're presenting what they termed a Career Connect and Career Launch, which is sort of their version of youth apprenticeship. They're 4 to 5 years ahead of California in terms of their planning. So it'll be very interesting to see what they've come up with. That's on June 5th at 9. And then at 10:30, Adele will give the full Monty of the apprenticeship funding in the state of California, which is super interesting because it is the best funded state when it comes to apprenticeship in general, youth apprenticeship as well. And a lot of things are happening already and are going to unfold over the next year. So that's happening at the committee level. And then one of the important things that the Feinstein earmark will also do is convene industry, convene some pilots and support some pilots that are testing out how this youth apprenticeship that, as Adele mentioned, is not so easy to bring about given the current environment, but also given just some of the the complexity of the partnership that has to work together. So those are the things that are happening as part of the earmark. And I think a good way to keep track of what that work is all about is through the committee, because we will certainly be sort of in lockstep in terms of reporting out to the committee and working with the committee on the planning aspects of the work. And are just interested in feedback all along the way. There will be plenty of opportunities to give input on some of the draft designs and so forth. So I'll stop there. I know we want to keep quite a bit of time for questions, and I know a bunch of them have already come in. So.
Yeah, and I'll just put in one final plug. I just put in the chat the link to the public meetings posting for the Youth Apprenticeship Committee. And as Vince was just mentioning, on our June 5th meeting, I'll be doing a rundown of apprenticeship funding and then kind of framing a bit of the public comment being requested around the Youth Apprenticeship Grant. And then there's a June 26th meeting, and the whole agenda for that meeting is to gather public comment on this youth apprenticeship grant. And so again, I'll present the framing in that meeting, but really the intent is for it to be a whole discussion around, we really just want to hear from the public around how we can deploy that grant most effectively. So those are the upcoming public meetings, and I would specifically call out that June 26th meeting as an opportunity to provide that public comment.
I saw that some of the questions were already answered, or at least in policy. One from Lawrence about the potential for coordination with the WIOA youth programs and how paid work experience could work and help on, I guess, help fund youth apprenticeship and or be supportive of. I don't know, Adele, is this something you'd have some thoughts on? Yeah.
So I think our brains are going in similar places. I think that the path of least resistance in building a youth apprenticeship program would be to make robust pre-apprenticeships that happen in high school that then link to apprenticeship programs. And maybe we can get a little bit of that dual enrollment in there in the high school context, where the apprenticeships are actually sort of happening just post high school, and in collaboration with community colleges. And yeah, absolutely, we want to be integrating with that WIOA funding that's focused on youth. And that's, a big reason why it's really meaningful to have the California Workforce Association really aligned with this youth apprenticeship group, because we need to be like building this all together and in collaboration. So yeah, that's certainly part of the vision, but that also entails our various workforce boards to see it that way and to be implementing it that way, and to be like showing up as partners in execution with apprenticeship programs, which some are shine at, are standout exemplars of, and others are later adopters on. But I can say, like, the amount of conversation about apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship in our workforce development boards has been like steadily growing. So that's great to see. So yeah, that's thoroughly the intent. Mindy, I see you have your hand up. Go for it.
Maybe I missed this, Adele, but when you're gathering folks to weigh in on this, are you asking employers?
Yes, absolutely. So we have some employer representatives in the on CYAC. Michelle is one of them. Michelle is an employer of youth. We have 2 employer representatives on the youth committee. But
Bitwise is a very unique situation. So, and after working in apprenticeship for 6 or 7 years now, I know that getting talented adults apprenticed is challenging. I just really am curious if the employers would rather apprentice a youth or an adult.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a topic that's come up a lot in the conversation, and I know it was in the chat a little bit, like the liability of employing somebody under 18. Employers often are like, no thanks, right? And so I think that's another both potential area for some sort of policy change, or it might inform our strategy to say, look, it's not worth it to try to strong arm a bunch of employers into employing 16 and 17-year-olds. Let's develop a really robust pre-apprenticeship system. And then when somebody is 18, that pathway is like really visible and available to them. So,
yeah.
But yeah, this issue of like liability of hiring a 16 or 17-year-old is a big topic of discussion.
Let me also add, we do have quite a bit of evidence from other states on this topic, because other states have obviously had to cross that threshold and have had success. And usually what ends up happening is employers are reluctant until they have a 16 and 17-year-old, and then they change because they realize what 16 and 17-year-olds are capable of. This has been true in Colorado. It's true in Washington state. It's true in every state where and obviously in Wisconsin, which has had it for 20 plus years. And they've all taken steps to make sure that the liability issues are covered. They have changed their workers' comp legislation such that youth are covered. Many of them are already covered, even in California at present, depending on whether this is a sponsored work experience activity. So I think there are ways around every objection. And the good news in terms of what it takes to have youth apprenticeship, it takes anywhere from 10 to 15 to maybe 30% of employers to actually take apprentices. So you really don't have to push anyone into doing it. You start with the people that are willing, and then you grow it from there. So that at least has been the experience in other states, and certainly in other countries. So I think you'll find that once they see what young people are capable of, they're converts fairly quickly. And there's some real benefits. They've been mentioned in the chat a little bit on the wage front when you work with younger people, let alone the whole sort of societal impact. But anyway, that's sort of another data point from research.
Peter, you have your hand raised. You're on mute.
Okay. I just came in because I was escaping the mosquitoes I had mentioned earlier. They showed up. I'm curious if you have both participation of or just the reaction or assessing the reaction of organized labor to this whole idea of youth apprenticeship. Because I just haven't seen that quite in this.
So we have two unions represented on our committee. So Denise Chagade is with United Health Workers, I believe, and then UFCW is represented by Chris.
Oh, okay. Good.
So
Okay.
those are the two like organized labor folks who are on the committee, and both of them are enthusiastic advocates for youth apprenticeship conceptually. I say conceptually because I think neither of them are actually employing youth apprentice, like they're not part of a program that has youth apprentices yet. But I would say, as you have taught me well, Peter, there is no monolithic response to organized labor feels X about Y. So I'm not going to pretend like I can say that statement. I'm
just curious what you've heard. That's not a loaded question. Okay.
Yeah, I would say I haven't heard like clearly negative or clearly positive in either direction. The one thing I can say is that the building trades for now are kind of not interested in joining this conversation to the extent that it's talking about 16 and 17-year-olds.
Right. That's just kind of out of their range.
Yeah, they're like, no thanks. And a lot of that has to do with liability.
Right. No,
being on a job site and that kind of thing. So to the extent that we're talking about like building trades, organized labor, like that's a pretty clear no thanks response in terms of 16 and 17-year-olds. But at the same time, they are always interested, they're developing MC3 curriculum, they're doing apprenticeship programs, they're doing all kinds of work in terms of the pre-apprenticeship to try to build that awareness and pipeline of talent into their industry. So from that sense, they're interested in the topic of youth apprenticeship for sure.
And just one other last real quick thing. When I was a dean at College of Alameda for a long time, and we had an early college. We still do have an early college high school there called the Alameda Science and Technology Institute. I just bring that up because when they first showed up, the college faculty were averse to them being there, and then they had applied to be teaching assistants, TAs, and they went, no way, no way. And then they said, you can't hire them because they're not 18, blah, blah. Finally, someone figured out how to hire them. And they were so effective and so successful that they turned around and were fighting over the high school students who could be their TA. So I'm just making the point, it's not even just that you can get away with hiring 16 or 17-year-olds. They often do fabulously if they're supported and given a chance to do something because they're so eager to get their hands on stuff,
Yeah, and we have a few examples of high school youth apprenticeship in the state of California, and one of them is in the early care and education space. The ESEPS Berkeley model included like bringing in high schoolers into their apprenticeship program. So indeed, that is one of the pilot areas of youth apprenticeship in California already. Go for it, Kristen.
Yeah, Kristen.
Hey there. A couple things. I'll do my best to hold my tongue about the litigiousness of us and how I have a really, really hard time believing that somehow German 17-year-olds are less dangerous than American 17-year-olds, but I'll leave that aside. But I want to go back to a couple things because, when we talk about this sort of youth versus high school apprenticeship and sort of these definitional issues, I just think it's important to kind of back up to the equity perspective that Vince was communicating up front when we started. And it seems to me that the source of needing these definitions, the source of sort of pushing here is not about employer needs and it's not about young people. It's about funding And it's about the fact that we don't have a dual system. So we don't have a thing that allows us to recognize across systems skills being traded. And so I just think that's like an important kind of starting point, because it's really easy to sort of leap to, we need these definitions because we're talking about students who are located in different systems. But the reason they're located in different systems and the reason we can't figure out how to accommodate it is because we designed those systems with different funding behind them. And so it's a funding problem and an institutional problem, not a market need. So I just kind of wanted to establish that, because what that then leads to is, and I'm thinking back to that early survey work. I'm working with another state that's doing similar survey work as New America did in 2018, where they came back and found that students had no kind of perspective really on apprenticeship. They just thought the idea of working and learning together and earning credit was good, and they were excited about it. And parents were really reluctant because they saw apprenticeship as a second chance or a second tier kind of pathway. And that's how this gets started. So I just want to make that point, because you could easily go down a road where apprenticeship is perceived one way and youth apprenticeship a different way and high school apprenticeship a different way. So anyway, I just want to kind of point that out. And then the other piece, also equity, that I wanted to share is, and this just kind of like was like a mind explosion for me. So I'm doing some work right now with Urban. It's evaluation work, and we're writing a brief on women in construction. And a couple dots I had not connected until recently are these. So there's, you may know the Commerce has a huge initiative around 1 million women in construction. There's a lot of interest. We've never had huge numbers of women in construction. It's always been a thing, 40 years, whatever. But the average age, like Adele said, is very old. It's 28, 29 years old, right? And one of the things that happens is for women in construction trades, supportive services and childcare are essential. Now, obviously, there's a gender dimension there because women bear much more of childcare and family care responsibilities, right? But when you are 29 and have those kinds of responsibilities, and then are perceived to need supportive services at higher rates than men do because they do not have those responsibilities, you have bias kind of built into the system, right? Now you have sort of a whole system that says, oh, for women, we need all these extra supportive services. And so it's more expensive and it's harder and it's more complicated and blah, 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 right? If said women were 18, a lot of those barriers would be removed, and a lot of the money and fundraising that we now have to do to support programs for women in construction would be eliminated. And so that is just an aspect of the age dimension and equity I had not grokked until this week. And so I just wanted to share it, because for me, it was just like, oh my God, how did I not think about that? So anyway, I just thought I'd share.
Thank you for that interesting perspective. Ju Young, you have your hand raised as well. Hello.
Yes, I have a quick question. I'm with New Apprenticeship. It's based in Texas, and intermediary that sponsors registered apprenticeship programs. So we mainly work with adults. But recently I had the chance to participate in statewide convening in Indiana, and that was focused on expanding high school apprenticeships. And so during the convening, what I learned is that this kind of fundamental challenge of scheduling for high school apprentices, because, apprenticeships are integrating into, general, like regular high schools. And so they have their own priorities. So the intermediaries that I connected with, they mentioned that oftentimes they need to support these high schools, really kind of based on the individual cases for their scheduling. And this is really a huge hurdle for scaling, obviously. So intermediaries even mentioned that they have to actually beg high schools to offer apprenticeships. So I just wonder if California has the same challenge and how you guys are kind of navigating this.
Yeah, 100%. And that's very much what I mean when I say, like, we have to look at sort of like the requirements of education, of high school. Like, if we really want to be building high school apprenticeships, it's not just about us creating a definition over in the labor code side of things. We need our vast education system to be also adjusting how they do things. And there are 58 county offices of education in California. I think there's somewhere around 3,000 K-12 schools, and every single one of those, I think it's maybe like 1,000 high schools. So we need to try to help 1,000 high schools rethink scheduling so that there can be high school apprenticeship. Like, oh my God, how do we do that? So, so yes, like there's some really fundamental things, and right now, it's like just the requirements of graduation don't leave a lot of wiggle room for there to be significant work-based learning to be happening, right? Significant on-the-job time. One aspiring high school apprenticeship program that I was talking to the other day, who's like, have lots of cool things going on, and the program like starts in junior year, and they're like working during the year and then in the summer, and that like they managed to have 2 school years and 3 summers, and the whole thing adds up to 500 hours on the job. And I was like, that's not an apprenticeship. Like that doesn't even get you to the 1,000 hours of a competency-based apprenticeship. And that's because during the school year, they could only have the apprentice working 4 hours a week. And I'm like, well, that's, you know, but that's like, if you're doing a full class schedule, like how do you fit in many hours of work of on the job time during the week? So yeah, there's like some pretty basic fundamental structural things that would need to be adjusted in our education system in order to allow for anywhere close to the like requirement of what an apprenticeship definition is today, which isn't like in a competency-based program has to be at least 1,000 hours on the job, but a typical apprenticeship that's time-based would have 2,000 hours on the job. So yeah, just like having the space in the schedule to get the on-the-job time is a challenge as the definitions exist today.
Or maybe is there any kind of, any type of like high school that kind of specialize in, that could be kind of specialized in apprenticeships, or maybe like a CT focused high schools, and so that we can take more kind of strategic approach, instead of like trying to integrate that into just broad range of high schools.
Yeah, I wish Allison were here, because we're getting into the realm that is solidly in her wheelhouse. But there are these things called partnership academies in the state of California that are a little bit more like sort of CTE focused as a whole institution. And that's certainly some of like the early implementation partners and like low hanging fruit that we're looking at in terms of how could we start to pilot this? How could we experiment with this? But like I said, most of the models I've seen so far it's like a year or so in high school and then a year post high school. And that's called a high school apprenticeship because it like starts in high school, but most of the OJT is happening post high school, which could be a good model. Like maybe that's a good thing for us to design, right? So maybe we're not trying to bend that vast system that much, and we just build these sort of 2-year programs that build the bridge into a career. So
yeah, I think the other models that we've seen in other states, South Carolina, North Carolina, are good examples, and Washington to some extent they're 3-year programs, and similar to what Adele just described, 2 years in high school with increasingly more time spent on the job, and then a year in college. But even the high school years already include dual credit, so you get dual credit. One thing, and this relates to Mindy's comment about the idea of exploring, helping young people, explore their minds, is that when we talk to superintendents of schools, principals, and career technical ed educators in high schools, they tend to be quite open to this idea. At least that's what we found. And in fact, they're finding that they have a hard time meeting all the CTE requirements without an apprenticeship. So an apprenticeship would actually help meet those requirements. And it does not necessarily have to take away from the requirements that are there in high school, but are a way to actually meet those requirements. But again, you probably don't get to 2,000 hours in the last 2 years of high school. That alone you might not do, but you might not have to. And so again, we'd have to do, you know, some design work, and that's what's up ahead for both the committee and these other planning efforts, and really look to other states as to what they have done.
Mark, why don't you go ahead and
Yeah, I mean, so I work in the manufacturing sector, and which has got its, you know, various challenges that might be different from other sectors. But I think the thing is until we get more, at least in the manufacturing, until we get more of a culture of apprenticeship, it's going to be really hard to get youth apprenticeships, because right now, you know, we just getting companies to do it is difficult. And when you do, they're relatively small, and then they want it now because they need a worker now. So if you want to try to get somebody just graduating, then that's on a timeline, right? That's in May and June when that student graduates. To try to get them in high school, I don't know. That is all the issues we've talked about. Is it, you know, is it a culture thing? Can you get people half day off? You got A to G, everybody's going to university. I mean, there's all these things about how you step in. I mean, I could imagine the career pathways that a lot of high schools having. When you graduate, you go into an apprenticeship. But to have that, you have to have apprenticeships lined up and enough companies like sitting there waiting, going, yeah, okay, we know what apprenticeship is. We like it. Let's plan ahead. And right now I'm just trying to get like, hey, do apprenticeship. And they agree to it. It's like, we need a worker now. Okay. So, I mean, it's kind of like, of course, to have more youth apprenticeship, you need more apprenticeships, but it's more of the culture of apprenticeships and that companies have bought into it. And so we should, this is in parallel. I'm going to say we don't try for youth apprenticeship, but it's going to be really hard until we get more companies going, yes, apprenticeship, we want to do that. This is our long-term focus. So anyway, thank you.
Amen.
Kim, go ahead.
Hey, good evening, everybody. So I want to echo all the things, first of all of the things. But kind of it was kind of a perfect tee up, Mark. Thank you. Nice to see you. You know, to me, this comes back to the work-based learning continuum and educating our employers on what that actually means. I joke, but it's kind of fitting that guest speaking is the gateway drug to work-based learning, in my opinion. And if we can get somebody just in the room to talk to our students once, that means that they're more likely to host a field trip. That means they're more likely to host a job shadow. That means they're more likely to host and mentor and advise and eventually apprentice. So, or host an apprentice. And so getting the foot in the door, I know this is a big conceptual piece, and I'm probably taking us down a rabbit hole, so apologies in advance, but educating our employers as early as possible, just as we're educating our students as early as possible and our educators as early as possible about what this career exposure means. We can't, you know, to Mark's point, we can't place anybody if they want it yesterday. But also our employers need to be just as at the plate as we are with supporting and exposure and giving our students the opportunity to just see what it's like. And that's, you know, that's one of our big initiatives is getting more involved there. So just my 2 cents. I think everything's great. I'm happy to connect anybody with anybody I've got. Yeah, it's fun. Kim with Earn and Learn, by the way, if anyone knows Gina Del Carlo, I work with Gina. We're doing really fun stuff on a product and services side to track work-based learning and bring all kinds of super fun data to all the people. So my 2-second spiel about us. So thanks, everybody.
Awesome. And I will just say, like, this conversation has zoomed in a lot on this topic of like high school apprenticeship and can we do in-school high school apprenticeship, and it's fascinating discussion and really helpful to hear from all the different voices in the room here. And I will just say, I think that there's when we zoom out to the overall topic of youth apprenticeship, and particularly when we think about the out of school working group of this, like the out of school populations, and really like that's the focus of the grant that is coming up is really focused on how do we get opportunity youth connected into apprenticeships. And to me, that's like really important work and the lower hanging fruit of the two bodies of work. And both are important and we're working towards both of them. But like, I totally agree with Mark's point about like, we need to just build a whole lot of programs to create these opportunities to begin with. And while we're doing that, we want to be making sure that we're like building the capacity with youth serving organizations to connect into those apprenticeship programs and to be feeding the populations that have been historically excluded from our economy in different ways and like giving them the paths into higher earning careers. And so I think that that's certainly a big focus area for us at DAS, is like, how do we build that awareness among employers? How do we build programs? How do we get connected to those youth serving organizations to build those connections and pathways, especially for opportunity youth to get into apprenticeship? And that doesn't require policy change, right? That just requires building programs, building awareness, marketing, making connections, and we can do more of that. So that's certainly a big focus area for us. Michelle, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I appreciate the comment. And I think one of the pieces too that's additionally unique about the out-of-school working group is really talking about rural communities in California and the disproportionate impact of out-of-school youth in rural communities, and what are those connection points when there are no infrastructure systems to get connected into. So really emphasizing the need for programs. And I think a big piece of the latest conversation has really been about outreach. How and where and whom is it that we're aiming to serve, looking at what are the current outcomes and what do we want them to be, and then what is it that you build in order to connect folks into the program, which may then indeed connect them into an in-school model if that's one of the program's pathways. But if folks are at all interested in having that conversation, I can drop my email in the chat, but would love to chat with you.
Hey, Caleb, go for it.
Hey, y'all. I can't help myself also. I just, we're talking about building programs, and a lot of the at least preliminary and grounding infrastructure already exists for students with disabilities. Students with IEPs are required to have transition plans. Those transition plans are required to have programs that deal with post-secondary goals, which regularly involve careers or higher academia. They certainly could include apprenticeship per policy, and so yes, there's no policy changes. And there are already existing models that work. Some don't work so well. They vary, of course, across California. But I'm just struck. And also, depending upon how out-of-school youth are defined, oftentimes the presence of a disability makes you qualified, quote unquote, as an out-of-school youth in some circumstances and capacities in the workforce system, just by the nature of having that, even if you're actually in school. So anyway, I can't help but, am reminded of a conversation that actually Orion and I were having earlier this week about how, when you're designing systems for communities and groups that are already struggling to have access, you inadvertently design for universality, and you design for everybody to actually be able to participate and access those things. So, if we're building these programs on the bones of what already exists and decide to plug money into that, and then make it open to anybody to participate in it, then you're actually designing with inclusion at the beginning. So anyway, it seems like there's great amount of opportunity and no policy change requirements.
Thanks so much. Any other questions from anyone else? Questions or comments?
I feel like we have like two meetings going on, one going on in the chat and
Yeah,
one
I know.
happening verbally.
Very vibrant chat.
Lots of great ideas. I love
Yes. Yeah.
it.
It's probably Orion's chatbot that's doing all of this.
Well, I did have a question that was in the chat, but are there any organizations that are really moving faster than others on this, Adele, that you've seen, or anybody else? Kaiser, health organizations? I don't know.
Moving faster on youth apprenticeship, or
No, just apprenticeship, because that's the ones I think we should focus on getting them then to connect and show a model of what that youth apprenticeship looks like by connecting with career pathways in the schools and stuff.
So I can tell you, like, just from a data perspective, the two sectors that grew by the greatest percent from 21 to 2022 were actually the three sectors were, which you'll find this interesting, Mark, education, like early care and education, but education apprenticeships, transportation apprenticeships, and advanced manufacturing apprenticeships. Which Mark, you'll find that interesting. When I saw that, I was like, serious?
Well, yeah, I mean,
that's impressive.
A large
it's existing programs registering more apprentices, but that I mean, given all the structural things around advanced manufacturing, when I saw that, I was like, God, that like really builds such a strong case for more.
Yeah, that might be by percentage too, but you know, if you go from 1 to 2, you know, that's it's 100% change. I mean, it's not that bad, but it's still, it's still.
It wasn't from, in none of those cases was it from 1 to 2. I mean, the
I know.
one started at low numbers and like grew to sort of medium numbers. So that one, yes, that was a lot. But transportation and advanced manufacturing were actually like going from solid numbers to bigger numbers, which was fascinating to see in the data. And particularly like transportation is really growing a lot. And I think it's going to grow even more. And automotive and electric vehicles and electric buses and line operators. And I mean, there's a lot. And so that's a big area of growth. So those could be two areas to start with. And I know there's data.
Is the detailed data available on anyway of like the companies and the numbers?
The companies, no, that's not, the company's information is not available, but there's that data dashboard.
By law? No, I mean, seriously, is it not legal to show what the numbers of the apprentices by organization
Nope, it's not ruled by law. It's diplomacy. So what we have on our data dashboard is by occupation and demographic, that's and geography. Those are the like 3 slice and dice the data things that are on our public dashboard. And we have an internal dashboard that I think, Mark, we've shared with you, that's like the industry, that includes an industry breakdown. So that all of that data is available, either is available through that data dashboard or easily accessible.
Great. If you could post, I know it's on the DAS website somewhere, but the Tableau one, the update, I want to make sure I have the latest one. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. I have to jump.
Thank you. Yeah, we are a little over time, but thank you for everyone for joining. Definitely drop your email in the chat if you are open to folks following up with you. I know that's been happening all along, but just stressing that this is a great opportunity to connect. And I put a few notes in the chat as well. I can share out the chat transcript with anyone who's interested. And I'm going to put a couple closing remarks in the chat, which is our next ApprenticeSIP is June 28th, and we'll be hearing from Jill Armington of CareerWise. You'll get a heads up from me and probably from Annie. And then I would also strongly recommend joining our meetup group, which is here. But thanks again for a very interesting conversation. It's good to see so many folks come back month after month. And we're going to be taking July off, but we're also hoping to have an in-person gathering later this year for folks who are in the Bay Area. So hopefully we can make that happen. But thank you, everyone, and we'll see you around.
Thanks.
Thanks, Adele.